Let's start with those Fed minutes. We were all waiting for them. They came out. I'm not sure they indicated the Fed is heading in any different direction than what you've been saying.
Those minutes were superseded by history in terms of the strong CPI print, the incredible job market creation, and the retail sales. So I don't think there was anything much informative in them. Look, I think we've got an extremely difficult economy to read. On the one hand, we got a set of very, very strong statistics. I think the data are coming in a way that confirms the view that I have had for a long time, that inflation does not get back to 2% without a meaningful slowdown in economic activity. Yes, inflation may over some intervals come down, but that's really mean reversion from the transitory increases that took place. But that's not enough to bring us to enduring 2%. The other big uncertainty that we have is that while so-called coincident indicators, things that move right along with the economy, look very strong, there are a variety of leading indicators that are more troubling. Inventories look to be building up relative to sales. Firms are reporting concerns about their order books. It looks like the business sector has a lot of people on hand for the level of output they're producing, and consumer savings are being depleted with a low savings rate, and who knows where the market's going to go next.
Lauren, let me ask the scary question. At a time when you and others were concerned about inflation, and Jay Powell was saying, don't worry, if it happens, we have the tools to deal with it. Is it possible the Fed does not have the tools it needs to really get inflation under control, given the circumstances right now?
Look, you can always stop the car by hitting the brakes hard enough. But that doesn't mean you can stop the car without the car skidding and sliding and hitting things. And so, yeah, the Fed can stop inflation, but whether it can stop inflation with a soft landing without impacts on economic activity, that's been very much in doubt from the beginning here since we set off this inflation. And my own sense is that it continues to be very much in doubt. And as the figures have come in, and particularly the figures on non-housing services look to be running way above target level, I think the chances of a soft landing, which look to be getting better, are now receding a bit. What the timing will be, that is hard to know, but we don't have historical examples when unemployment gets below 4 and inflation gets above 4 of getting through the situation without having a recession at some point. And I think that's a powerful historical truth, and I think it's one that's relevant to our current situation.
Larry, this week, as you know, marks 1 year now since the beginning of the war in Ukraine when Russia invaded. Obviously, there's been horrific costs in terms of lives and also in terms of the damage done to the Ukrainian economy. But what about globally? What have been the global economic effects from your perspective of this conflict?
It's been devastating for poor people in poor countries around the world that have had to deal with food price hikes on a very substantial scale, that have had to deal for some interval with higher energy prices. It's accelerated the concerns about the fracturing of the global economy, and that will ultimately, whatever its impacts on us, I think have some substantially adverse impacts for poor countries where historically, exports have been a major route to economic growth. Look, I think the world's going to have to step up in the international economic area. We're going to have to spend a lot ultimately supporting the Ukrainian economy and reconstructing the Ukrainian economy. We've got substantial increases for that reason and for others of refugees, but that doesn't make the question of climate, that doesn't make the question of preventing the next pandemic, that doesn't make the question of poverty, it doesn't make what's happening in the Sahel any less urgent. And so this is a time when we're going to need a lot of imagination, a lot of energy from global policymakers.
Well, when you talk about the world stepping up, one of the institutions we traditionally look to is the World Bank. We received word on Friday that President Biden will nominate Ajay Banga. He's the former MasterCard CEO to the position. What do you think about that? And I guess as important, what stands in front of Mr. Banga if in fact he becomes the head of the World Bank?
Ajay Banga was seen as a visionary and highly successful leader of MasterCard, which was unique or substantial in its global vision and in its commitment to inclusion of a very wide range of people in financial services. Of course, the World Bank is a very different kind of institution than any other bank, having global development as its central mission. And it's going to need transformation of a kind it has not seen probably since Robert McNamara was its leader more than 40 years ago. So I think that Ajay Banga has a huge opportunity ahead of him to bring about transformation, but in a world where his shareholders have really serious political challenges at home, it is not going to be easy.
And finally, Larry, let's revisit Israel, something you raised on this program earlier. You saw ahead some possible risks, not just for the politics in Israel of Bibi Netanyahu's aggressive pursuit of reform of the judiciary, but also some possible effects to the economy, particularly the tech sector. We're now seeing it even with respect to the shekel. What is going on in Israel now? And from your perspective, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Where is it?
I'm very concerned. The first reading of the judicial reform passed through the Knesset. That was very troubling legislation, not because ultimately judicial reform is important in Israel, in my view, but that particular set of judicial reforms driven through by a narrow majority in a hurry at a fragile political moment will raise profound questions for the owners and deployers of capital, both in Israel and around the world. And I think it is a matter of very substantial economic importance for the remarkable economic story that Israel has been, that we move from a phase of driven legislation to a phase of compromise and deliberation as judicial reform moves forward.